Imagine, if you will, you're invited out to your boss's cabin in the woods, and when you get there, he's got cameras set up, a gate, and you were dumb enough to drive a giant SUV on an eighth of a tank of gas. Now imagine an alien which can scramble your brains and for some reason completely strips your clothes off before abducting you, is running around snatching up your friends and wife. Well, there's no need to imagine because that's today's topic. I know, quite the segue. In the vast wilderness of Graceland, a group of friends head to said imagined cabin, which kind of sounds like a band that plays in the backgrounds about thunder and whatnot. You should never really listen to them, but always somehow it's on the radio. Anyways, but once arriving and partying, everyone keeps making really weird comments about the younger brother's girlfriend. Yes, very good guys. As they continue to party, a meteorite touches down from overhead, almost blasting through the cabin to do so. Once tracking down its landing point, they find something which activates the almonds of the other aliens who intend on getting it back. However, getting a look at this species and the capabilities that they have, straight communication would have probably been preferable, but obviously that's not happening here. So let's talk about them. Also, if you guys enjoy this type of content and want to be notified, subscribing is free and let you know when I upload. Supposedly. You know what? YouTube will probably just curate it for you. But first, this episode is sponsored by Upside. Are you ready to save money on travel and groceries? Of course you are, because oh my god, the inflation! Anyway, sorry about that mental break. Well, with Upside and their partnership with over 30,000 businesses and 25,000 gas stations in the 48 states, they not only put money back into your pocket, but because they improve the profitability of local businesses as well, everyone wins. Here's how it works. Let's say you're buying gas. You can open up the app on your phone, find which business around you is offering the cheapest gas through Upside, which can actually be as high as 12 cents cheaper and up to 15 cents if you refer a friend. You go there, check in, and get your gas as normal. After Upside confirms the purchase through a debit or credit card, they will send you the savings through the app. And this is real money. It's not a point system, although you can use the money to get gift cards if you like. You can also decide to cash it out and it goes back into your bank account. Let's say you got started on the first of the year and regularly drove throughout the year, you'd have enough for Christmas presents by the time December rolls around. For instance, I went on a road trip to Seattle last September from Georgia to Washington. Using the app, I saved quite a bit of money on the way there and back, which then I proceeded to use in the actual stay in Seattle. Download the free Upside app and use code GAMING to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. So if all that sounds good, which why wouldn't it? It saved money after all, then by hitting the link in the description, you too can start earning back money today. We kick off our story with a happy couple having a great time where nothing can go wrong. Oh no, it's all about to go wrong. As they drive along having a great time talking about how much they love each other and how great it is to be pregnant and have two functional eyes. They're heading to the hospital for the second ultrasound while Padre over here is filming with a camera while driving. Sigma behavior. And you know, it's not really their fault. I mean, it is city driving. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have almost wrecked into me in Atlanta while I'm just standing on the sidewalk. But the T-bone does the work, which I'm guessing there was some sort of glass in the car or something. Maybe from the camera, I can't really tell. All I know is safety glass, which all cars have, does not break like that. But it went straight through his eye of Maddie B over here, so the eyeball is completely donezo. Then Jessica whispers about the baby, so she's straight up not having a good time. 10 months later, Matt is finally editing the videos from earlier and also doing something that I think would feel horrible. So he has a fake eye, right? Well, he jacks the camera from his phone, but here's the thing. The eye camera, I imagine, would need batteries and like an actual microchip to fit into it. I don't know if all that's gonna fit in a fake eye, that's all I'm saying. But once he does, he then proceeds to make it even worse on himself. He covers it in glue, which that's going in his eye hole. Then he covers it with like fibers, which are going in his eye hole. I cannot imagine a worse feeling than threads inside of your ocular cavity meat just scratching away at it the entire time. Ugh, God. Anyhow, so as he turns on his TV, an unidentified flying object ran into his satellite, totally wrecking the thing as Matt begins to drive to go pick up all his friends to go to the cabin. We meet Joe, who also is mega into cameras, as he brought a Canon camera, sponsored by Canon, to bring to the cabin. Also, Matt literally has a pupil glowing red, and nobody seems to notice the camera at first. Also, all the women are changing in the car for some reason. Who knows? Which now we meet Jessica and Trey. Trey calls Matt Tron because of his eye, so he takes it out, covered in eye juices, hands it to everybody so they can get their bacteria all over it, but then it gets dropped in the back of the car as the dog starts licking it, ensuring that when he puts that back into his eye hole, full-blown bacterial infection is all but assured. Several hours later, they do the most nerve-wracking thing imaginable. Like, for me, this is one of those anxiety things that puts me on edge so bad that I would probably be like irritable the whole trip. Matt refuses to stop at a gas station. The gas light is on his SUV, meaning, hey, now would be a very good time to prioritize finding some fuel. But he keeps driving, in the woods, on back gravel roads. Apparently so far out that they can't even get a phone signal. Someone relieve this man of his captain duties. He's failing. I don't know why. This just always rustles my jimmies. Anyhow, so get this. They start questioning why Matt's boss would want a cabin out this far. Oh, I don't know. To get away from people, perhaps? But they chalk it up to how he's just trying to capture Bigfoot. Okay, that's a pretty good conclusion, I suppose. So they pull up to the gate, which everyone has something to say. Also, I know you can't hear this, but this whole thing is like ADR'd, and it sounds hilarious because for some, it sounds like they're literally outside the canyon talking, while others actually sound like they're in the car. I love low-budget movies. Also, everyone's accent in this movie sounds way off. I know it's supposed to be Quebec, Canada, a hell on earth, if you will, but for some reason, it just sounds not very Quebecish. And me being from Georgia, I'm definitely a connoisseur of Canadian accents. The cabin is also pretty lit. It, however, begins a mad dash to what sort of room that you want. As Matt goes into their room, we get a jump scare from Jessica, because why not? It's a horror movie after all. Then they head outside. It's actually a pretty nice view. So the party begins as they eat steak and drink wine, and after my Halloween party on Saturday, this is painful to watch. So as Julia strips and goes into the hot tub, because it's a horror movie after all, and didn't I already say that? 2 tropes in just a minute? Wild. So Matt almost gets busted for filming that, but Jessica is too focused on the giant light in the sky getting brighter. It's obviously a meteorite as it flies overhead and lands a little further away. They now run off to it to go find it in the woods, where they still think there's BIGFEETS. Trey comes out to try to go with them, but because he's the little brother of his wife, they're just kind of like, go back and hang out with the women. Joe and Matt then begin their search, but do the ridiculous thing and get so far out there that they lose sight of the house, and also Trey just decides to come out anyways. As they split up, because that's the smart thing to do, Joe starts getting scared as Matt walks off. Also, Matt ends up finding the meteorite based on the fires on the ground. Coming up to it, they see a hole in the ground. Matt puts his hand in the hole, always a good plan, as Joe freaks out, which freaks him out, so he tries again. So you're not gonna believe this. He pulls out a rock. But this is a strange rock. It's super cold, and considering meteorites are ice and rock, anyhow, usually, I guess it's not too surprising, but usually entering Earth's atmosphere definitely heats things up. So they all head back to the house now, but are sort of lost. Matt does the smart thing and tells everyone to wait instead of moving deeper into the woods, which you should remember that if you're ever lost in the woods. Don't keep walking. You need to just sit down and wait. People are gonna come looking for you with the last place that you were. But they hear something in the woods, so that plan kind of goes out the window. And so here was the weird thing. They were apparently out there for like 3 hours. No idea how that was possible. As Matt begins his search with his light, spooky hands appear to grab his shoulders, but then he gets snatched up by a trap. Matt says something was walking around him, but he doesn't know what it was or how close it was either. Matt then hears his dog whimpering somewhere in the woods, which also isn't ideal. Matt hands Trey the rock as they begin to run and find the dog. Coming across a cave in what's clearly day, but they tinted it green for night vision mode. LOL. Like, look, even the cave entrance is lit up. It doesn't really matter. As they go Ted the Caver style in the cave, they hear noises in the back of the cave, but then find a phone just sitting in the cave. It's Trey's phone, freaking out on the ground as something runs by, scaring them. They then exit the cave, but forgot to put on the night vision mode for about half the time, and you can clearly see it's daybreak or evening, but supposedly it's 1:46 a.m. They then hear more of the growling noises and hide Hobbit style against a dirt mound, and of course, the camera is blurry, but we see the thing is moving above them. It can also move extremely fast. The thing is looking for them further up on the mound, but actually never finds them. So we now cut back to night as they run through the woods. The women now have come looking for them as Matt tells Joe to stay quiet about it, and Trey looks pretty freaked out. Joe wants to pack up and leave for the night, but Matt says they'll be fine in the cabin. Also, all their phones are acting weird, to which this prompts Matt to finally come clean that they're actually lost and lucked out that they found the boss's cabin at all, and that really they don't have enough fuel to make it back out at night because Matt is horrible at planning past 3 minutes from now. So Joe and Matt then go inside and have a right proper domestic over what to do. They argue about maybe it's a Bigfoot, and then we see some footage of something grabbing Matt's arm in the cave, but they didn't see what it was. Not sure how, but instinct would probably force you to look at what it was. Maybe that's just me. Matt now puts the rock back in his backpack and takes out his eye. Matt tells Jessica that Joe thinks it was a Bigfoot. Matt's pretty concerned about his dog, and considering my cat freaking got out yesterday and still hasn't come back, I can relate. So Matt and Jessica get in a fight over having a baby as she heads into the bathroom. Okay, this is the perfect example of accents I was mentioning. So the window gets broken as Matt then runs in there, and it's clear there's some sort of symbol on the window, to which he says the bird must have gone kamikaze on it. Like kamikaze. It was just a weird way to say it. So Joe and Matt then head downstairs where Matt opens a beer. Joe confronts him about, drinking, and we get this whole thing where he doesn't want to lose another baby, but Joe is telling him to move on. So here's the most unbelievable part about being 30 myself. It's 2:26 in the morning, and they have been drinking since like noon. Okay, maybe not noon, maybe more more like 5 o'clock. I don't know about y'all, but I'd be completely dead to the world at this point, like lights out, nights over, snoring. But Matt doesn't want to talk about it anymore and just keeps drinking that natty. So outside, it's almost 5 a.m. when the TV cuts on. For some reason, there's a camera on Trey and Julia as they sleep. It's a little odd. The window is open as he gets up and then heads to the TV room fully dressed. Again, why exactly? Who knows? Like you've been asleep for 3 hours. The mad lad. But as he sits there, old Mr. Monster Hands is lurking in the background as the TV is freaking out, and then it palms his head, causing him to freak out. Electroshock to the brain? Possibly. So now somehow Matt wakes up after heavily drinking at 5 a.m. and walks out onto the balcony inside of the actual cabin and spots a bunch of balloons coming up. The lights are all flickering and the clocks are going ham. He spots an open door and heads outside to see more of the same, all electrical disturbances all the time. I kind of expected a jump scare here, but I was pleasantly surprised. The radio then turns on as he gets to the car and stops it by locking the doors somehow. He then hears a growl out in the woods as he sees a shadow inside. Following the noise, he heads to the basement as another shadow is also inside. Going to the couch, he finds Trey with his eyes open and mentioning how it's too late and they're all gonna die and all that. He gets him up and brings him back to his room. As Matt heads back into the TV room, he sees a symbol on the TV flashing on and off before it cuts out and he heads back upstairs. The door is back open and it's clear that something is still in the room with them for a moment as something is running all around and all the doors and cabinet doors are basically flung open. It really, anything that can move is moved. And then here's Julia. She has come to find Trey. As they check the cameras, they find that Trey just sort of noped out of there and walked outside in the woods. Very good. They now try the house phone, and rather than waking up everyone and getting help, Julia and Matt begin walking in the woods as Jessica joins them. They hear something in the woods moving, but they don't really know if it's Trey or not. Julia decides to just Sigma female it and runs out in the woods, so now they have to look for both of them. Matt wakes up Joe, and then they go out there. Matt tells Joe how Trey looked hypnotized. There are a lot of names in this, and he has no idea what was drawing him into the forest. They then hear a screech as Matt goes caveman style and pulls out a knife. He yells out to it as it's clearly circling him. Matt then is grabbed and dragged by it, but it lets him go and takes off running. Back inside, Jessica's phone keeps recording for some reason, but she's able to get through emergency services somehow. But then she says they are at 1111 Ranger Lake. Bro, it's Ranger. What is Ranger? What the name of all that is holy is happening with these pronunciations? But the call dropped because there's no signal apparently at this point. So now Liz is able to find a map of where the Bigfoot sightings were. It's almost about 7 a.m. and Matt is blowing up yellow balloons to mark their way in case others follow or they need to get back. Julia is still on her own saying, Trey, you don't need to impress me anymore. Like, what do you even mean? There's clearly something else going on here, or this dude has like a severe case of sleepwalking issues. How far are you up your own back end to have to think that this is him trying to impress you? What a time to be alive. So as she goes though, Trey is impressively standing there, Blair Witch style, because he was trying to impress her, as you know, and she hears something behind her. As she turns around, Trey has impressively disappeared. Julie then gets grabbed by the alien and gets the same thing done to her head. They then find her shoes and then see that all of her clothes are up in the trees. They then hear Trey scream and somehow they take off and then bust out into a cornfield. You know that thing that the Quebec mountains are famously known for. Then again, I don't know, maybe they are. I don't really frequent Quebec. Joe then yells at Matt that they would need a helicopter to find anybody in this cornfield. They then hatch a plan. If you could tie a balloon to the phone, which has no signal, they can get a perspective on the whole place somehow. But they don't really have any helium with them, and they only have 2 balloons left. Also, how would the phone connect to whatever they needed to view it through? And how would it even remain stable once up in the winds? Sounds like they got a real dumb plan there. Let's find out how it goes. Luckily for them, the plan is saved because balloons appear out of nowhere, so Operation Cannot Possibly Fail goes off without a hitch. They then send the phone up, somehow are able to view it through another phone, and then get a look at the cornfield, which of course has a crop circle in it. Joe asks, are the creatures doing it to them? Which yes they are. So Matt is the first one to notice it, that this is a symbol that he saw on TV. Joe is able to spot Trey somehow as Matt then takes off running. Joe gives chase, but as they get there, they find it's just Trey's clothes, which means he's also running around in the nude. But now they hear the thing in the cornfield, so they take off because of course. So these things are trying to communicate with them obviously, but at the same time, it's just screeching. We then get the most signed scene imaginable as a leg exits the cornfield as it jumps out and out of the corn tens of feet high. Matt and Joe are now attempting to exit the cornfield. Matt tells Joe that the creatures wanted them to see the symbol and that they really do be trying to communicate with them. They are just getting more aggressive and angry at them though, so obviously they aren't doing something that they need to do. They need to get back to the cabin. So these things again are listening and then set up balloons to lead them back. Matt tells them about his eye recording as then they head back. Everyone is still inside. Well, Jessica and Liz anyhow. So they go back to the car car to try and leave as Joe and Liz head out, but of course, the SUV A has barely any gas, and 2 has all of its fuses fried. So they will return to Monkey. Well, maybe a little more technologically advanced than that. They're gonna try to use the bikes. Joe says something hilarious that it's 9 a.m. at the latest, right? He looks up at the sky and says, "We have about 5 hours of sunlight left." Unless it took them 4 hours to exit the house and get in the car to find out the fuses were fried, the sun goes down at like 5:33 in November in Quebec. They should have like almost 9 hours of sunlight left. No idea where he came up with that guess. Joe needs to probably get outside more. So Liz and Joe take off with the bikes. Now, not very far anyhow, because as soon as they try, hilariously seen in the rear window of the car, they just get sucked up into the sky as their clothes get sent back down. They check the footage and it confirms, yep, they're totally screwed. As Matt watches the footage, we see his eye get poked out and also footage of the satellite getting destroyed, which Matt can see the symbol on the ship as well as the creatures trying to grab Matt on screen. He goes back into his backpack and then finds the symbol on the rock. Somehow, it's now night. Like, bro, vast amounts of time are passing like crazy fast. Like, he just said they were leaving the house in 30 seconds and it was day, and now it's night. That wasn't 30 seconds. But he puts on his backpack and they are now throwing deuces to the alien house. Heading downstairs, they find the balloons are there and brah, they are trying to tell you something. The balloons pop as the aliens have had enough and begin a full attack on the house. Jessica has a freak out in the corner as everything does stop, but it's not really looking good for Team Human. They head outside and make it further than Joe and Liz did, where they find their clothes and bikes. They then see a Prometheus on the hillside as it jumps down, and I don't know, it looks like it punches Matt, which then inspires a mad dash out of the cornfield. The thing appears and then grabs Matt, pulling him into the corn as Jessica gives chase and helps him in the distance. I'm not sure how they were able to free him, but hey, it worked. As they sit there with Matt holding Jessica, he tells her, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna lose you too," as then she's instantly pulled up into the sky. The comedic timing of these aliens. Matt at this point dropped the rock and apologizes to the corn as light appears overhead. The alien comes out of the corn and then finds the rock. You see some symbols on its hand and it has huge eyes. It touches the rock, revealing it was a capsule for a baby alien the whole time. Ask yourself, why did I get blasted through the sky? Dude, I have no idea. How would this even happen? Seems like bad parenting. So Matt apologizes because he didn't know what this thing was. It screeches overhead at the ship and then it's brought back up. As he sits there with the thing throwing deuces to our planet, it fires a few times back at the planet, which is all of his friends who are nude, probably about to be super cold. Well, would you look at that? The authorities have finally arrived. Wow, thank you for your swift and speedy response. So now it's a year later. They have a kid and everyone is super jazzed about life. It's really kind of surprising they didn't end up in some sort of government facility considering that they had alien contact. But then again, it's Canadian, so maybe rules are different over there. So first things first concerning these creatures is to establish the notion that they actually aren't naturally as we see them. Now, I'm not saying our eyes are not interpreting them correctly or anything, but it's more in line with what this species is and the issue with spaceflight and what they are capable of. And to determine that, we first need to talk about their actual frame and how they move around. So, getting there, starting with the feet, we can't actually see them. Things move ridiculously fast and it's borderline impossible for us to percept. However, we can assume a few things about them based on the few frames and what we see with their hands. They likely have 4 toes in total, much like how, since they have 4 fingers, typically in biology it tracks to have a similar amount of fingers to toes. Now, something to understand, however, is that's not always the case. Things like geckos, for instance, they can have 5 toes and 4 fingers, and sometimes on one leg they will have 5 toes and on the other they'll have 4, whereas one arm will have 5 fingers and the other still has 4 fingers. Basically, geckos are just a crapshoot of press random and see what you get. Given the reptilian look of these aliens, I would say it is possible they could potentially have a similar genetic makeup concerning toes versus fingers, but again, it's not confirmed. Wow, we just spent a lot of time talking about feet. Moving on. The legs themselves are digitigrade in structuring and will have the ankle actually bend at roughly 90 degrees when running, with the knees, as you could also call them, bent up at 90 degrees. But what's interesting is this may just be the migraine talking, because I have a migraine right now, but it appears that they are triple jointed in their legs, meaning that there is the ankle as discussed, a second knee to point the leg upwards, and then run to the upper leg with like the first knee. This configuration has allowed for the creature when all 3 joints are completely outstretched, but the creature standing upright is extremely tall. Moving up to the abdominal region, their frame is overall extremely lithe. Sporting no visible body fat, their musculature in this area appears sinewy but not bulky like humans are. Also, given the fact that they stand over humans quite easily at roughly 7 to 8 feet tall, or 2.1 to 2.4 meters tall, the muscle stretching would cause this to be the rule rather than the exception. The abdomen sports a somewhat sucked in appearance, as well adding to the slenderness of this creature. Moving up to the thoracic region, the rib cage is set up almost like a human's would be. There is a central sternum with connecting ribs running in an orientation that we would expect to see on primates. Moving up to the shoulders, the creature has been lifting because, good lord, those are some pretty large trapezius muscles, probably to hold up its huge nerd head. Got him! The shoulders themselves are not very big. It's clear this creature, while not very muscular, relies on contractility of the muscle itself in order to move, as it does, because moving down the arms, we continue to see that it is still sinewy and not very large. However, moving down to the hands, we do see something interesting. Seen only a few times where the creature grabs for a human skull, points of light have been seen at the fingertips, which may give us a clue as to what's going on internally with these aliens. However, before getting there, moving up to the head, we see the actual features of this creature. The head is elongated, almost like the skulls found in Peru from ancient cultures, which is always interesting as clearly it's a cultural phenomenon, but why were people binding their skulls in such a way? Moving past anthropology, these alien skulls appear very similar. This has caused their face shape to appear long with a small mouth and massive eyes. The sclera of their eyes are black with massive irises to function to limit light, much like ours do. The crown of the skull continues upwards, adding to the overall height of these creatures. What's interesting is the skin pigmentation change over time. It's clear when the alien finally makes contact with Matt and cracks open the egg that the young are really more of a pinkish hue, whereas the adults appear dark gray to almost green in color, and in some ways this may suggest on their own planet that given the skin pigmentation and black sclera that their bodies were adapted for decreasing the glare of a bright sun or potentially hailing from a binary star system given these physiological adjustments to their home planet. And speaking of home planet, what exactly would that look like? Well, we have covered the brightness based on the physiology. However, with that said, it was also likely a lower gravity world. Lower gravity planets and moons that are able to house life hypothetically would have animals on it that are much larger or at least taller. And the reason for this is it's easier to grow taller because you don't need to be as much squat, I guess is the best way to put it. On Earth, our gravity isn't too horrendous given it's pretty much we know and all we know. But if we ever were to say conquer Mars and start colonies there, it is theorized that just within a few generations of people being born there, they will start to get taller than on Earth. And the reasoning is the bones have to contend with less downward force and as a result ends up longer. Now, take this with a grain of salt because this isn't the only thing that affects height. If you take Titanosaurus way back in the day, which is said to be the largest dinosaur on Earth, they were extremely tall, but also there was more oxygen in the atmosphere allowing for them to grow to that size. Now, you may not know, but this presents humanity with some interesting issues that we're going to have to overcome, and it all goes back to our bones, planets, balance, muscle. See, our meat suits are perfectly adapted to our planet because this is where we're from. Surprising, right? Well, if you were born on Mars in the year, say 2400, for instance, while you may be standardly 6'5", coming to Earth would be a nightmare if you wanted to stay long term. First, you'd have to contend with a higher gravity, which is going to be consistently uncomfortable. Your bones and muscle are going to be weaker, and as a result, your strength here would make everything even more difficult, and coupled with that, everything would feel heavier. Your bones also would not be equipped to deal with the pressures of this planet, which in turn could cause you to more easily break them. And on top of that, you may have your joints deteriorate at an increased rate due to the extra perceived pressure. Well, it's not perceived, it's there. It is well cited that humans in low gravity environments can quickly lose bone mass. Astronauts, for instance, who were in space and at the peak of their physical health, upon returning to Earth had lost over 20% of their bone mass. And maybe even worst of all, your inner ears would have to contend with this move and readapt to a new planet that is spinning slightly faster than Mars with more gravity, meaning vertigo would be a real issue, knocking you completely off balance. If you've ever had vertigo, it sucks. Virtually everything about you, believe it or not, is affected from going from lower gravity to higher gravity and vice versa. While the effects of lower gravity are less noticeable since your body is physically capable and more unrestrained when going into that environment, adding pressure such as higher gravity or a thicker atmosphere causes your body to endure more stress and would have to be countered in some way. Now take this alien species, a species that is hypothesized based on its physiology to have evolved in a lower gravity environment given their height and light appearance. How exactly would they function and survive on something like Earth given our higher gravity environment? Would they be able to jump as high as they did? Likely no. So now take this with a grain of salt again, and there's a lot of grains of salt in this, but we know very little about their actual planet. In fact, we actually know nothing about their planet in the context of this movie. This is based off assumptions that we can see looking at their musculature and height. I personally believe there must be bioengineering that is done in order to correct correct their own adaptations to a world they have left, which is something humans are going to have to do if we ever want to survive in our solar system. Either we need to create a way to change the environment in order to match Earth, or we need to change our bodies in order to adapt to a new planet. So which one sounds easier to you? If you said make it all Earth-like, you're correct. We need to find a way to chant Earth like we chant USA. So anyways, where was I? Okay, yeah. So much like how we would likely have to alter our bodies on the fly to deal with high gravity environments, we would also need to make sure we didn't lose bone mass in lower gravity worlds or moons or even long space flights. You would have to over-engineer your body. So imagine it. If you could take your body, have greater contractility of the muscle you already have to deal with the oppressive gravity, be able to maintain bone mass, but not based on what planet you are on, but also by stopping the process of acclimating to the world and instead just have it naturally sit at a more bolstered level, and in general, have your body operate at a higher baseline in order to cope with the demands of wherever you may actually be, that would be ideal. And the takeaway is that the issue of having to transform over time to these demands would no longer be necessary. Given the technological prowess of this species, this is exactly what they did. And we see the largest example of this is things added to the body that allow them to interface with their world in a way that would almost appear like magic to humans. The bodies of these creatures are able to pull off feats that appear to put them well beyond superhuman levels, and it's because they have engineered themselves to be as such. For instance, the jumping portion seems pretty cool, but you have to remember you have to come back down. The compressional forces of jumping and landing along with the elongating forces would leave several thousand pounds of PSI on the bone, and yet it does not break. Running as fast as these creatures do would tear our muscles to pieces because we are 100% homegrown. However, with them, it's almost synthetic in how they can operate and move. While I'm not suggesting it's a suit of any kind, it's pretty clear to see that these creatures, instead of wearing a suit like humans will have to when we first start colonizing, they've changed their bodies to the point that they are the suit. Which there's an argument to be made that humans have almost topped out with our own evolutionary pathway, and one day we may have to do this. Our brains, for instance, cannot get much larger. They can grow a little more, but eventually all that's going to do is slow down the thinking process, and that's not going to help much. There's also the issue of heat generation, and due to the size of our brains, if they got much larger, how would we export that heat out of the area in order to not cook the brain? Our heights have grown significantly with nutritional values increasing, although if you want to know something horrifying, that's going to definitely cause you existential dread. Our farmlands are becoming less nutritious, and at this point we're heavily reliant on fertilizer in order to actually get nutrition. The dirt itself is pretty much almost depleted. Fun abound! Probably something we need to figure out on Earth, honestly, because if we plan on, again, conquering Mars, I doubt there's any usable nutrition in the soils, sand anyways. But back to what I was saying. So with humans, there's an idea floating around that the next stage in human evolution is something that we have to add in, a deliberate attempt to move ourselves forward with something like implants. At a certain point, it would alter the species in such great numbers that we would eventually enter an era known as the era of Homo cyborgus. Then over time, as more is added, potentially having consciousness transferred into, say, a machine, we become Homo machinus. Now, is that really going to happen? Who knows? I'm just a Homo sapiens. It's hard to tell what the future has in store for our species, and even if it will last that long. But with these implants, dealing with other worlds would be much easier, and we would be massively more adept at it. And coupled with that, our ability to interact with one another or even other animals would be increased, which is exactly what these creatures are doing. On the hand of this species is something specifically that shows they have artificially influenced their species in a way that explains how they're able to achieve what they do. The glowing fingertips that they use to directly interface with the human brain is fairly interesting. As to our brains, it's probably more of an electric shock, but gives the creature usable information. So it's likely fairly unpleasant, given that everyone is screaming while it's happening, and you are borderline comatose afterwards, almost like a postictal state, which you enter after a seizure, which, considering the process causes you to fire your neurons, probably even if you don't want to, it basically is a seizure. But on top of that, given their other technological feats, which are not limited to just the ship itself, but also things like being able to materialize matter, such as balloons out of nowhere, or snatch humans up into the sky, which I also imagine requires dematerializing of their bodies and rematerializing it on the other side, because given that their clothes disappear, this means their bodies are the only thing to go, because it seems like only organic matter is capable of being moved around, and maybe the aliens are just sending up the balloons super fast. One of the things that I do find the most interesting, now two things actually, is first their understanding of human intentions, and also the inability to miss one of our satellites around our planet, and this may hint at a few things. The first is that the Greys, as they're likely called, are a species in human mythology, or maybe it's not mythology, but supposedly they've been interacting with human beings for quite some time, though, you know, like the gray aliens with the huge eyes and the large head. However, they are usually depicted as being shorter in stature than humans, whereas these creatures clearly tower over us. This This species in particular would be in line with the Greys, something that has been around our planet before and understands humans to a degree, because let's be real here, had they not at least studied us to some extent, we don't really look that far removed from other animals on this planet, and by comparison to their own technology level, we really aren't. They would even know if we were aggressive to try to crack open the rock and actually eat the kid. However, when Matt basically apologizes to the thing, it seems to understand and accept it as a miscommunication. All that said though, what is up with the inconsistencies? These aliens seem rather intelligent, however, how would they run into our technology out in space? Is there like nothing on their own ships alerting them to space junk? Because there's definitely a ton of it surrounding Earth. Although this may be why when they came down and interacted with Matt and his group, they attempted communication at first, because it's clear by having things in orbit around your home world, we are at least somewhat capable of communicating. But given the cross-species interaction, it's hard to see what comes off as aggressive versus what's just average communication. For all we know, these creatures grab onto one another's heads to communicate, and that's sort of just non-aggressive. So by grabbing our heads, it's like a handshake, whereas us screaming at them in fear may seem massively aggressive because they do not understand our customs, which again, scores a point for what in the world was this species thinking. In fact, actually, that's one of the issues that if we do in earnest run across alien life, how do we communicate with it? We had this issue on our own planet and we're all from here. Humans smile at each other to indicate friendliness. However, with almost every other species on this planet, baring your teeth is a sign of aggression. Even something as simple as extending your hand towards an alien may come off as aggression because we are moving something that we can strike with closer to them. Standing upright may also be seen as a move to fight because bears stand upright when they're ready to enter combat. Basically, this whole thing is an example of how not to communicate with one another, which is always an interesting concept because the problem could have been solved in a few seconds given no cultural barriers or species barriers. But this is something that we will have to contend with if we ever do find alien life. Regardless, this species is one who has altered their bodies to become the suits they need on other planets. However, by doing so, they also risk incidences with the local population, and by using their methods of communication, it appears aggressive to humans, which in the short term, not exactly a great way forward, but hey, it's a start. But I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great, as it actually does get this into the algorithm, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and other channel links in the description. By the way, I'm officially exclusively streaming on Roanoke Games on YouTube because I have no faith in Twitch as a platform. Guess we'll find out what happens with that. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our two astronauts, Lipsy Genji and Wesley A. Weaver Jr. Thank you guys. I'd also like to thank our two astrophysicists, Death Dancer, as well as Phoenix, and our scientist, Countryside Limbo. The rest of my patrons, I do appreciate your support. All right, so that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.